No, I think I should go. Because I was up on Tuesday, and then I taught Wednesday, then I collapsed. But I don't know. I think it's just exhaustion. But, I should maybe get in touch just to make at least I know. Okay, why don't you do it?
I should say before we begin that we have some copies of the critique book. I'm not sure how the German said it, actually. It should be Gotha?
It's Gotha in English.
Oh, no, it ought to be Gotha, I think, the Gotha program. Well, actually, anyway, we have some copies of it up here. Those of you who didn't get it in sections. Well, this is the third and last class on Marx that I'll talk about. Marx. And I always feel, as I do, perhaps even more so in the case of Mill, that particularly in the 3 times it's quite inadequate, and I apologize for that. I think of Marx and Mill as the 2 great figures in the 19th century. If we think of philosophy and social theory together, they combine both of those in a way that I think that no one else in the century does at that level. So that although there are great figures like Weber, for example, and Tocqueville, they don't have the philosophy side, you might say, to the same degree. So I always feel I don't do a very good job of these people. Anyway, what I want to say some things about today is the full communist society, and I hope to get to that a bit. I might make some introductory comments. In Capital Volume 3, there is the following oft-quoted remark that all science, well, I quote, I don't know exactly how it is in your English translation. I'll translate somewhat, it's easy to translate as follows, that all science would be superfluous if the appearance of things and the essence of things were to directly coincide. So it's a kind of a split between essence and appearance, and I said have a phrase that makes social science possible. And this I take to be a statement about full communist society, namely that in that form of society, the essence of things and the Erscheinungsform of things, the appearance of things, coincide. Now, what's that mean? What is some eventual elucidation of what that might mean? There's sort of one of Marx's Hegelian-like expressions that appear in the text that one has to explain. Well, first I begin with the background and comments over things that we have done before, points we've gone over before. In the first class here on Marx, you recall that I discussed the controversial question of what is the point and aim of Marx's labor theory of value. And I maintained that, as others have maintained, and anyway, some others have maintained, that its point and aim is essentially the following. First, to show that despite the fact that capitalism is a system of personal independence, which ascribes to all citizens certain equal rights in a regime of free contract, and all market transactions are, anyway, formally speaking, voluntary, that nevertheless capitalism is a system just as much as feudalism is, in which surplus value is extracted, and therefore capitalism is a system of exploitation. By definition of exploitation is the extraction of surplus value given certain institutions. The second point of it was to show how, by various institutions and practices under capitalism, the extraction of surplus value was hidden from view, and so that the invisible nature of exploitation is a feature of the social system as a whole. And it's not a trick of certain clever people who designed it this way. It isn't some personal wrong or improper action on the part of people. It's part of the way the system works, even when they're doing and acting in ways that that system allows. So, on this interpretation, Marx thinks of the labor theory of value as a method of economic analysis that is designed to establish precisely these 2 points. It is a method framed for a particular purpose of answering those particular questions about this particular social form, namely capitalism. And so it is not, I suggested, a theory of price in the usual sense, although it has some relation to that. It's not a theory of just price, and it isn't a theory about the source of the origin of all values being in labor. I do think that Marx regards social labor as a kind of a social asset that society has in some way as a whole, and he's interested in how that is allocated and how that works. But that's not an economic theory. That's sort of the background assumption that explains, I think, why he's interested in doing the things that he does. So, in reference to the quotation, then, we could say, in a full communist society, the labor theory of value would be unnecessary, or a theory of that kind would be unnecessary. Only in a society like that of capitalism, in which the appearance of things and the essence of things does not coincide, is there any need to penetrate beneath the surface appearances of social institutions to the essence of things, and to see how surplus value and exploitation are made possible by the system of property. That is the factor about the capitalist scheme that doesn't make that possible. Now, we can also say that a theory like the labor theory of value is necessary only in a society where ideological consciousness plays a basic role. Either as an illusion, that is, if people are deceived and taken in by appearances, and in that sense quite reasonably fooled, or as a delusion. That means there's some psychological element, some need that leads them to affirm these views. So we can say that of a full communist society, that it is a society whose members are without ideological consciousness. In their society, the appearance of things and the essence of things directly coincide, and they are therefore without illusions, and they have no need for a theory like the labor theory of value. In the second class, we discussed Marx's apparent view about the historical significance of conceptions of political justice. I say his apparent view on this because, like the labor theory of value, this is a controversial topic, and one has, of course, to be very tentative about it and the things that one said. It was suggested that for Marx, conceptions of political and social justice are part of the ideology of the political systems of domination of society divided into classes. One class as owning the means of production and therefore dominating the other class, or the other classes, if there are a number of them. The different conceptions of political justice will characterize different historical modes of production. And Marx remarks that they are adequate to, or we might say appropriate to, these modes of production when they are properly adjusted to them. That is, when the legal political system and the notions of justice are adjusted to the mode of production and therefore enable them to serve their historical role. In capitalism, this role is rapidly to build up the means of production by having institutions that encourage the introduction of innovations and so on. Again, in reference to the quotation then, conceptions of political justice, as Marx thinks of them, will not exist in a full communist society. That was a suggestion, and the quotation I have in mind is about there would be no science when the appearance and the essence of things disappears, or no need for science. That they belong, that is to say, conceptions of justice, to the various systems of domination. And they are conceptions of prehistory, that is a phrase that Marx used to refer to the time before socialist society, or at any rate the last stage of it. They are conceptions of prehistory, these conceptions of justice, because they involve a kind of false consciousness. Let's note several points here about Marx's view. It's easy to understand there are a number of possibilities, and not all of them, of course, am I sure about. First of all, he does not deny that people in a capitalist society who accept or who affirm the capitalist conception of political justice can and often do make numerous criticisms of the institutions or of what happens, actually, one might say, under capitalism in the life of that conception of justice. For example, they can criticize, and they do, force and fraud, monopolistic combinations of all kinds, fixed prices, and the rest. And that Marx's view allows for this and other kinds, you might say, of internal criticism of how capitalism operates. It's bound to operate, but to depart from its own notions in certain ways. And he certainly means to allow for that in this account of it. Another, perhaps more important point is that when Marx says that conceptions of justice are adequate to their associated mode of production, during the high period, when these modes of production are serving their historical role, this, on the interpretation I was suggesting, is to be taken as a statement within his political sociology. He is not himself endorsing these conceptions from a moral point of view, let's say, on the assumption that he holds some kind of such point of view. He is saying what role they have historically and how they operate. And in particular, I don't take him to say that the legal system and the conceptions of justice and so forth ought to be adapted and adequate to the mode of production. Now, he isn't saying that. He is saying on interpretation I'm suggesting something within his political sociology and saying how these conceptions actually operate. Within the capitalist society, presumably there would be no conception of justice outside of all of them from which a statement of that kind could be made. But finally, when I say that Marx thinks that conceptions of justice are elements of the ideological consciousness of a capitalist society, I mean that he thinks that those who affirm these conceptions are in various ways deluded. They need to believe these things. Both capitalists who own the means of production and workers who don't, on the whole, in the high period, need to believe that the scheme is just from some moral point of view that they accept. Otherwise, the social system will not work smoothly. It won't operate to serve that purpose. So there is a need, one might say, that the system has, is if it's to work, it needs a conception of this sort. And it is affirmed in its high period. And in that sense, they are deluded as opposed to being here taken in. They are also in various ways mistaken. That is to say, because they think that there are rights which are in some sense founded on eternal principles, or at any rate absolute principles, might be better phrased, principles of reason, principles of natural law, natural right. They are mistaken to think that that's the case, and that is another element of ideological consciousness. They fail to see the purely historical role of these conceptions. So it's Marx, one might say, as an observer or political sociologist who's making these remarks about the system and how it works. And yet all of this, even if correct, still leaves the possibility that in a full communist society there are moral conceptions and values affirmed. And while none of these are presumably, if the interpretation I'm suggesting is correct, are conceptions of political justice as we know them historically, there may be a conception somewhat similar to a conception of justice, and I shall not try to answer this question in any definite way. It's something I just suggest that you think about. But we might consider what a full communist society might be like, and why one might think of it, and why one might think it is a society beyond justice, in the sense that it has no need for political justice. Now, I think here it's important to keep in mind that the question that concerns the public culture, or what I have the phrase that I've used before, it concerns the public culture of a full communist society. We are asking whether people in a full communist society have conceptions similar to our conceptions of political justice, the kind that we know of historically. And this means whether their public life and thought contains notions of this sort. That is, the people in this society use these notions, or do they express themselves when they have social and public discussions by appealing to principles of this sort? Are they acquainted with these, do them, make decisions in the light of them, and so on. It may be as observers that we would say of this society that they perhaps acted justly, at any rate they are not acting unjustly in any obvious way, so it would appear to us, but that's not the question. The point is, from their standpoint, from their consciousness, do they have conceptions of this sort, and do they enter into their public discussions and their public life? So the suggestion is then that we try to work out what a full communist society is like. If a society, we might say to do this negatively. So we say first, it is a society in which ideological consciousness has completely disappeared. No one has any need for these delusions, for false consciousness as a psychological support for it. The system itself does not require that kind of support, and also the social institutions, the surface appearances that they present do not conceal their essence. Rather, appearance and essence directly coincide, or whatever that means, and I'll try to give some content of that for a moment. The second point is that it is a society in which the mode of production completely eliminates the extraction of surplus value, and so exploitation and alienation no longer exist. A note here, the term extraction of surplus value, which I generally used, I think. What the term extraction refers to is how surplus value is achieved, how it's produced. In the first stage of socialism, as Marx describes it in Critique of the Gotha program, there is certainly unpaid labor, and therefore there's surplus value. E.g., there's surplus value in the form of investment laid aside, certain amount of social product devoted to overhead, social overhead, and so on. But it's not extracted, since it is the outcome, I take it, of a free, voluntary decision, and it's also a democratic decision by free associate of producers. My comment on this last point, Marx, I believe, does not mean by exploitation, normally at any rate, simply the existence of unpaid labor or surplus value. What he has in mind is the nature of the background system of property, which in a capitalist society has roughly these features. These are familiar features, but that's from his text. I just mentioned kind of thing I think he had in mind. First, that the aggregate social surplus, that is the total of things that are produced by surplus or unpaid labor, falls into the hands of other people than the workers. So it falls into the hands of those who own the means of production, and thus it is the owners who have control of the output of production. A second feature is that the owners of the means of production also exercise the thing's autocratic control over the labor process within both the firm and within the industry. It is the owners who decide upon the introduction of new machinery and the extent and the details of the division of labor and so on. A third point is that the owners of the means of production also determine the extent and the direction of the flow of new investment. they decide, each firm individually, on the assumption of competition, where their surplus funds are best used in order to maximize long-run profit. Thus, the owners as a whole, that class, and they don't decide this jointly, but they, in a sense, decide it as a group separately, make use of the social surplus and determine the rate of growth of the economy. Of course, they don't control it. It depends on how the market process goes. But insofar as there are human decisions made about that, it would be made about that. They would be decisions on the part of those in that class. Thus, if we say that exploitation is the extraction of surplus value within a system of ownership of the means of production as described above, and if we say that alienation arises in large part as a result of the background social conditions in such a system of ownership, then it follows that the social form of freely associated producers, as Marx calls it, does overcome, in his sense, both exploitation and alienation. This social form is that presumably fully achieved in a full communist society. It is the social world of freely associated producers in which ideological consciousness and the need for it has completely disappeared. Now, in this social world, the way in which I think he thinks of it, people have true beliefs and their activities realize truly human values. In particular, just some examples of what I think he has in mind: the values of self-development, meaningful work, autonomy, free and uncoerced association, etc. The members of a full communist society understand how their social world works, and its essence and its appearance then coincide. Again, referring back to the quotation with which I began. We might say in philosophical terms, we have the unity of theory and practice in the sense that the true description of the social world is a description of a social world that is good. So we have the unity of truth and goodness, where I'm thinking of goodness to be different than the notion of the right and the just. It's also the case that the members of this social world know that it is good, so we have this self-conscious awareness of its truth and this goodness on the part of all of the members of it. I'll make 3 comments on this. First, when it is suggested that the public culture of a full communist society has no need for and hence lacks a conception of political justice, it is not, of course, intended that a full communist society lacks all moral conceptions. After all, a conception of political justice is but one kind of moral conception, and it's a rather special kind at that. Nor is it denied that a full communist society may have various conceptions of right and wrong that are quite different from any that we would say are political in normal sense, or even social in normal sense. And certainly Marx thinks of a full communist society as realizing the values of self-development, meaningful work, and the other ones which I just mentioned. That these fall under the notion of the good rather than of the right and of the just. And I'm assuming, as I mentioned before, that people comprehend and understand these values. Secondly, when Marx himself expresses hostility, as he does throughout Capital and elsewhere, to capitalism as a social form, he does so perhaps because he thinks it has outlived its historical role. Its time has passed. It's not doing what it is supposed to do now. That is done. And therefore it is now an irrational system headed for breakdown, and one which denies the values, those I mentioned above, without sufficient reason, so that it degrades human beings, it stunts their self-development, it denies their capacities for free association, and so on. So it's now, in that sense, irrational, and that's it's rational and degrading, etc., and that's a different kind of criticism than to say it's unjust. Third point I might make is that the reason that full communist society has no need for a conception of political justice would seem to rest, in part at least, on the thesis of Marx's historical materialism and his explanation of class conflict. In full communist society, there are no classes, presumably, in his sense of class, which depends upon the ownership and means of production and control over those and all the elements that go with that. And so class conflict disappears. With this would also disappear the need for institutions of domination, of which conceptions of justice and the legal order are a part. So in that sense, the need for a conception of political justice would disappear. The final comment I'll make is that as a critic of liberalism, Marx perhaps is saying something like the following: it is wrong to suppose that justice and rights and those conceptions that define them are a permanent feature of human society. Rather, they are merely a fixed feature of historical societies, and in particular a fixed feature of liberal society. But that society and its underlying divisions and class conflicts will pass away. And when that passes away, there will be no need for conceptions of justice. Well, what I might now do in the time that remains is to go over and try to illustrate what I think the idea involved is in describing a full communist society as one in which everything is open to view and there is no discrepancy between the appearance of things and the essence of things. We'll have to go this fairly quickly, perhaps it'll be a bit obscure, but anyway, so I'll try. One might note from the early Paris manuscripts on alienation, the section that talks about that, is that the notion has four aspects as it is presented there. First is that under the capitalist mode of production, the laborers are alienated first from the product of their labor, from what they produce. And Marx says it becomes an alien being, that is, it is, for one thing, owned by, controlled by the capitalist, who owns the output and who has the rights to dispose of it. Now we've gone over that, and that's fairly obvious that that's so. So what that means to him at any rate. But more important, I think, or more revealing of what he's getting at, is that he thinks that the surplus labor of the workers over time, when accumulated by the economic system, increases the mass of real capital, and so increases the output and size of the forces of production at the disposal of the capitalist class. Also, it's the case that the products of labor appear on the market, and the movement of prices that reflect their being sold on the market are not understood by the workers. The whole process of how prices move and how they are determined by flows of output are not understood by anybody. It's just, in that sense, the market is a foreign phenomenon, particularly the movements of prices on it. The reason it's a foreign phenomenon, or a phenomenon that we don't understand, is that there isn't any public social plan of production that people understand, in the light of which products are produced. So the adjustment of prices to market forces appears to them as being controlled by some power or forces that they don't understand, and that those powers are independent of anything that they do. Second feature of alienation is that workers are alienated from production and from the productive activity of labor itself. So as Marx says there, that work is external to the workers. It isn't a part of or the realization of their nature. Work isn't fulfilling in any way. It doesn't develop an exercise of their natural powers. So if the workers feel at home at all, it is doing their leisure time. Work then isn't any longer voluntary. It isn't meaningful but forced. It isn't the satisfaction in human need, but it is a means for satisfying other needs. So labor in this scheme of alienation is self-sacrifice, self-mortification, and while working, the labor power belongs to someone else, or perhaps I should say it has been hired out to someone else who has the use and the direction of it. A third thing that Marx says about alienation here is that workers are alienated from their species, from their species life, and so is everyone else, incidentally. I think everyone in society in some sense is alienated from species activity, from species life. Now, the notion of species life, I'm not sure how to interpret that. I think it's a rather complex and interesting notion, and characteristic, I believe, of German idealism to use a notion of this sort. At any rate, the way I'm going to interpret it. I think the important thing is not to trivialize it in some way. That is to say that species activity or species life simply means that human beings are species beings. That is to say, they are by nature, on this interpretation, social beings. I mean, that's the trivial thing to say. Or to say that human beings have reason and self-consciousness, and that they are aware of themselves as belonging to one species, each of which can likewise use reason and has self-consciousness. Again, I think that's a somewhat trivial thing to say. Not that that isn't also meant, but I don't think probably that's the thing Marx has in mind. I think it's something like this, or perhaps like this, that human beings are a distinctive natural kind, or species, in that they collectively produce and reproduce the conditions of the common social life over time, and yet at the same time their social forms evolve historically and in a certain sequence until eventually a certain social form develops that is more or less adequate to their nature as rational, social, and active, and creatively productive beings. So that in a sense, then, human beings create through time, through their own history, the conditions of their more complete social self-realization. The collective activity by which this full collective self-expression is accomplished in cooperation, of course, with natural forces, is species activity. So it has this historical dimension. Over time, it means producing, reproducing over time until eventually there was this adequate form comes about, this adequate form being full communist society. Now, an essential part of the social self-creation of human beings over time, in Marx's view, and he emphasizes this, is productive economic activity, including processes of exchange. So that to be alienated from species activity is, first of all, not to comprehend and not to understand this historical process. That would be alienated from species activity. And second, to be alienated from it would be not to participate in that activity in any self-realizing and meaningful way. As the activity would be directed entirely by others in which one had no say. And he thinks that is the case with the working class under capitalism, and therefore they are alienated from that aspect of the species activity. So if we ask, what does it mean for all to participate in this species activity in a self-realizing way, then the answer is provided by the kind of economic scheme that obtains whatever it is in full communist society, which we get some idea about from what Marx says about the early stages of it, or the first stages of it, in critique of the Gotha program, and in the various remarks that he makes in Capital about the economic form of freely associated producers. I might turn to that to give some account of that, and as to how that is how I believe he thinks that fulfills some of these conditions, although actually perhaps that's obvious at this point. What one should look at is section 4 of Capital, chapter 1, the various economic forms that are there discussed, and I'll just mention some of them. One of them, the simplest, is that of Robinson Crusoe. This is a one-person economy, and assuming that Robinson Crusoe is rational in the usual sense, then the plan and economic operations of this one-person economy is presumably clear. That is clear to Robinson Crusoe himself. It is Crusoe's own activities and the plan that he draws up. He learns by experience what things cost in terms of his own life of time. He keeps track of these in his stock book, and so he knows their labor values and so forth. And Marx says that all the relations between Robinson Crusoe and the objects that form his wealth are his own creation, and are here so simple and clear as to be intelligible without exertion. These relations contain all that is essential to determine values. But, of course, this is an economy that has no social relations at all, but it's an example of what Marx has in mind by everything being open to view, to Robinson Crusoe. Second, there's a feudal economy, which he discusses, and I've already made some observations about that, so I'll skip over that. Third, I'm going to mention another one which he there talks about, which is a patriarchal peasant family. Here we have directly associated labor. That is, there is no system of market transactions. And there are different social functions on the part of a number of people. There will be a division of labor between people, but it's a natural and spontaneous division that it's just determined by age, sex, and the seasons and so on, and not by the most effective, proper terms, organization of the factory and division of labor, contrast with that. Yet in this case, the products of labor are not commodities, even though labor here is social, as opposed to the Robinson Crusoe economy. And the members of the family have common purpose. And once again, one can say that the members of the family understand what's going on. They know the family plan for operating, say, the farm, and also here then everything is clear and open to view. Marx also talks about simple commodity production, capitalist production. I will skip over this. The important thing that I will turn to is what he mentions here, is the production of freely associated producers who own the means of production in common, and the labor power of all is consciously, I take that to mean publicly and socially applied as the collective labor of the community. And here Marx says that all the characteristics of Crusoe's labor are here repeated, but with this difference that they are social instead of individual. Assuming that the share of each producer, well, that's the end of the quote, it's just the one sentence that I read. Assuming that the share of each producer is determined by their labor time, then the labor time plays a dual role in this first stage. Its apportionment to different activities in accordance with a definite public and social plan establishes the correct balance between different kinds of work to be done and the various needs and wants of the community as a whole. That labor time also measures the part of common labor that is borne by an individual and determines the share of each in the total product, which is destined for consumption after the various deductions have been made for investment and these other things. So that social relations of individual producers, their various labor times, their corresponding shares, are perfectly open to view. Again, they are visible and public, and they are the outcome of social decisions in which all have taken part. Now, in this last form of of society, which I've called that of freely associated producers. One has laid the basis, I think, for how Marx understands, or how he thinks he can understand and make sense of this idea which I have called the unity of theory and practice in a full communist society. The idea would be that the economy is regulated by a public settled plan, which is drawn up by some democratic process in which all free associates have taken part, or they can take part if they want to. I don't want to say they're not obligated to, but they can if they want to. And the presumption is they all take part in it. Marx adds that this, of course, presupposes certain material conditions which have been brought about as a result of a long and painful historical process of development. So to get the full idea of the unity of theory and practice of phrases I have used, we have to add, I think, the following, namely that the beliefs upon which the social plan is drawn up and the other relevant beliefs are true, or at any rate accurate enough, or at any rate they're not a delusion or illusion. So that, let's say, the relevant beliefs are true, and that the human values that are achieved by the plan and which are expressed in social institutions are appropriate values of the kind described earlier, that is self-development, autonomy, etc. Now, one might need some economic science or some means of calculations in order to work out the plan. I think that we ought not to question that, or think that in itself is any objection. The point is, one does not require a certain kind of economic science or economic theory, that is, say, the kind that is presented in Capital. A full communist society does not always, or even perhaps often, achieve this full unity. But the point is, its institutional forms satisfy some of the essential preconditions of this, namely the public, visible, and social aspects of institutions, which are illustrated by this idea. So what I have attempted to do, I will stop here, is to use the idea of freely associated producers and the discussion which Marx gives in section 4 of chapter 1 of Capital Volume 1 in order to try to make sense of these ideas and to present the notion of trying to work out in this kind of negative way what full communist society would be like, on his view, or making a suggestion of it. And I say we do it negatively because we say, what would it be like if it is without ideological consciousness completely, without delusions, without illusions, without the need for that? And what would it be like if it lacked alienation completely and exploitation completely? And it does appear, roughly, but this sort of sketch, that if we think of the society of freely associated producers and think of what's involved in that, one can see the kind of picture that he might have formed. And if we ask how it is possible that that form of society does not need a conception of political justice, then the answer is that presumably that class divisions have disappeared. And if we think of the view of historical materialism and the kind of ideology that is connected with that, one can see how he would have had to suppose that political conceptions of justice would then become unnecessary. was it not to say that there are no moral values in this kind of society? That's an altogether different question, and I haven't at all asserted that. Okay, well, I'll stop there.
What? You read because I think what I
Let's see.
I got the things. But can you wait? Wait, those are 40 cents. I'm sorry. So you have, they've been going out. So you change.